last longer than that. And I really do think we're at a crossroads. And I'm not going to talk about this necessarily on a macro level. I'm going to talk about it on a micro level here in Massachusetts. And I think it's so appropriate that we are having success protecting these inalienable, God-given, these weren't given to us by a government. These rights were given to us by a creator. And to recognize that. So tonight, or today, I want to encourage you that we can actually put feet to what we just talked about. So this is going to be a very practical, how do I do this here in Massachusetts? How do I do this here in New England? I always like to say in 2020, we all saw, hopefully, 2020, if that makes any sense. We saw this thing called COVID shut down churches and leave the marijuana shop open, and leave the abortion clinic open, and leave the liquor store open here in Massachusetts. And I think I said this story before. In Worcester, if you guys know where Worcester, Massachusetts is, we had a pastor named Chris Casey leave his doors open, never shut his doors during COVID. Across the street from his church was a liquor store that was left open. So, of course, he says, well, before the liquor store is left open, my church should be open. And so we ended up, long story short is, we ended up suing the governor of Massachusetts. And we won, the pastor won. And yeah, and that happened here in Massachusetts. He was criminally charged 3 times, and I think it actually helped that the pastor was also an ex-con. So he wasn't necessarily afraid to go back to prison. And we need to all be like Chris Casey here in Massachusetts. We need to take that we need to be willing to lose something. And I think that's part of the problem. We've become so comfortable. We are the frog in the boiling pot. And we're saying, our religious liberties aren't under attack. They are. And it was Ronald Reagan, our president in the 80s, who said that it only takes one generation to lose all of those rights. So here in Massachusetts, I want to encourage you, just one town over. We're in Woburn. One town over in Burlington. We've been having amazing success. A year ago, imagine all of you guys were in a classroom, right? And imagine you're an 11-year-old 6th grader. And you're given a survey at your school that has all kinds of highly inappropriate sexual questions as an 11-year-old. And your parents were responsible. They opted you out. Talk about the wokeness. Your parents opted you out. And that school that 60, 70% of your property taxes are going to support is violating your parental rights and teaching your kids things that you would never teach at home. And so parents got upset in Burlington, and they knew that we existed. They knew that we could support their parental rights. So we drew up a complaint with the DOE, the Department of Education, and even Linda McMahon on the president's cabinet saw Burlington and recognized our complaint. And now, 1 year later, we have a gentleman who is a worship leader running for school committee. So we want to change the whole school board. We have several parents on the wellness committee now who are saying we are going to control what's being taught for sex ed in our schools, not the school. And I will tell you, you guys know how our schools celebrate Pride Month every year? Well, last year, for the first time in a long time, the Burlington schools did not celebrate Pride Month. And they got that's a big deal. I don't know anywhere else in America, let alone in Massachusetts, where that's happening. And that's happening because 20 parents, is that a lot of parents? There's 25,000 people that live in Burlington. 20 parents made a difference in Burlington. I want to tell you a story about another town that's not too far from here, Lexington, right? You guys know, if you know American history, you know Lexington. Lexington is one of the most woke, unfortunately, towns in Massachusetts. Well, thankfully, at our Supreme Court, we just had a wonderful victory to support religious liberty and parental rights called Mahmoud v. Taylor. And about a year ago, the Supreme Court said, if anything gets in the religious way of the religious upbringing of your children, you can completely opt out of it. anything. And so a kindergarten dad in Lexington about 6 months ago, the school was teaching a My Two Daddies book, okay? And he said, that goes against my religious, how I'm bringing up my child. And so the school ignored his parental rights. And because we had this wonderful Supreme Court decision, we brought a lawsuit against the Lexington Public Schools, and the federal judge agreed with us and supported the parental rights of the parent to opt his kid out of anything that gets in the way of the religious upbringing of his kids. And so that's in Massachusetts, where federal judges are agreeing with us. And it's about time that Christians take a leadership position in this very important, too many times, you guys know, too many times we have left a vacuum in our local, state, and federal government and said, that's just not an area where Christians should get involved, right? And shame on us, shame on us. When James 1:27 tells us the true definition of religion is to care for the orphan and the widow, and the last part there is, and to keep our children from being polluted by the world. Jesus goes on to say that if anyone lets one of these little ones fall into sin, what? Better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the bottom of the sea than to let these little ones fall into sin. How many times have our little ones, our children, fallen into sin because of what they're learning in the culture, especially in our schools? And so that leads me to my last point, is that as parents, my wife Ashley and I have 5 children. And as parents, I know they call you a little crazy for having anything over 3 maybe. Well, as parents, we need to really take seriously where our children are during the week and what they're learning. And we always tell people, if you just take your kids out of these government schools, 75% of the problems that our kids are coming home with, they're getting from the schools. They're getting from the peer group. They're getting from all kinds of, they're in that school 35 to 40 hours a week. And I always tell pastors, how can you could have the best children's pastor, the best youth pastor, the best programs. How do you compete when that kid is with you 2 hours a week, but it's in the government school 40 hours a week? It's impossible. You can't compete. And so we've looked at that and we've said, okay, 70% of the kids in Worcester live under the poverty line. They'll never be able to afford a $5,000 a year Christian school. So we said, well, why doesn't the church get involved? Churches have 2 things. Churches have affordable and available space that never gets used during the week. And they have these wonderful groups of volunteers that many times we have retired teachers in our churches. You don't even have to be a teacher to be a proctor or a tutor. And so we call these things church-based learning centers. We started 4 years ago. Now we have 26 church-based learning centers serving almost 2,000 students for as low as $100 a month for 5-day K-12. So the church can solve this problem. Back when you established a town in America, you needed one thing before you established that town. You guys know what it was? A church. A church. And like when Catholic parishes would start back in the day, they wouldn't start their parish unless they had a what? A school, right? This was always the culture, is that we didn't have churches without schools because we took seriously the education of our children and said these need to be discipleship academies. Because I guarantee you, at that government school, it's a discipleship academy. But it's not the kind of discipleship you want. Amen? So we are here to partner with you. We are a family policy council. And I know everybody in this room values family. And if the family falls apart, the society falls apart. And I totally agree that America is the country, is the nation on the shining hill that the whole world is looking to. And it starts in every little town and city in America. And this is exactly how we do it. We partner like we did in Burlington. We partner like we did in Lexington. And I could tell you a myriad of other stories across Massachusetts where we are winning and protecting Not the rights that the government gives you, but the rights that God gave you. Amen? So I just encourage you, I'll be here for the rest of the day. We would love to continue to partner with you and protect your parental rights. You want to run for school committee and make a difference on the local school board? I'd love to see that. I think the Lord would love to see that. What a wonderful way to minister to your local town and city. So please, I encourage you to see me afterwards. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your work.